Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. This presentation will be about the analysis of factuality verb function in journalistic articles. My name is Siti Nadhirah Ajuna. So let's begin with the introduction. Right, so what is factuality? Right, factuality is actually a linguistic trueness based on grammatical signs or semiotics symbols, grammatical symbols that transmit factual messages. For example, the use of a verb to signify the relationship between the factual degree of an event and the proximity of spatial context of reality. Spatial context in this manner is, for example, how close something is or how remote something is, right? So based on, according to Sabri and Pustojovsky 2012, identifying the factuality status of event mentions is fundamental for reasoning about eventualities in discourse, right? So what are the empirical observations that can be listed out in order to justify factualities, right? Some of it are grammatical manifestations, quantifications over entities and events, modality, hedging devices of a varied nature. So when we talk about factuality, there has to be some sort of communication that happens in between, right? So communication in this manner entails intentions and goals, communicative instruments, and messages. The contexts are depending on what are the agent trying to convey and what does the receiver perceived to be true or perceived to be untrue, right? So there is a psychological connection between linguistic trueness and also goal-directed behaviors. So this kind of relationship and connection, for instance, produces an amount of communication. So this amount of communication contains a degree of factuality. So according to Verschuer et al. 2014, they suggested that goal-directed behaviors can be achieved under two different circumstances or two different conditions. Number one, the agent has to display knowledge of the causal efficacy of its own actions and outcomes according to the current state or context. Secondly, the desired action outcomes has to be influenced or motivated by internal representation or internal environment. So next, what are the outcomes that can be expected throughout this analysis or this discussion? So this paper will unravel the linguistic truth on in two different articles. So we'll be evaluating three different degrees of factuality. We have the high factuality, which consists of two different classes, which is the emphatic auxiliary do, and also the high factuality. And secondly, we have low factuality, which consists of also two classes, which is the high assuring hypotheticality and also the low hypotheticality, and also last but not least, the ambiguity.
My name is Mohammad Fadil bin Arifin. So I'll be presenting on literature review for the paper. So the first paper that we use is the use of modal auxiliary verbs in reporting COVID-19, a study of selected article in Daily Nation newspaper written by Odiambo Kenneth and Ovala Silas Odiambo in 2020. So the paper actually examined modal auxiliaries and the usage in reporting the pandemic COVID-19 in the Daily Nation newspaper in Kenya. And Kenneth 2020 mentioned that modality is important in written discourse because it conveys the writer's attitude both to the proposition they make and also to the readers. And it also can enhance the pragmatic aspect in English writing as cited from Highland 1994. So the finding of the study shows that the authors mainly chose predictive auxiliary models, will, may, can, and should, with will having the highest frequency in the paper. So it was also mentioned that news articles about COVID-19 comments on events and contain background information, interpretation, as well as opinions on COVID-19, such as prediction of the number of cases, and also the possibility of another wave to hit. So this kind of thing is actually acts like a prediction. Because of this, the frequent usage of modal auxiliary verb will mainly indicates the salient function of modals, essentially in expressing obligation, intention, and prediction. So for the next paper, we use a category system for the analysis of factuality in newspaper discourse, written by Eugenie Almeida in 1992. So this paper actually introduced and used principal classification of all discourse statements as either factual or non-factual statements. And this analysis aims to enhance the understanding of the linguistic structures and pragmatic functions. Media mentioned that the factuality of newspaper prose is able to be a better deal, more complex than is usually imagined, mainly because complexity existed in both systematic use in certain types of statements in newspaper and in terms of patterns of authorship. Almeida ran a quantitative analysis of a survey that was constructed in such a way to constitute a preliminary test for generality, and the analysis was divided into two parts, which are to analyze statements as factual or non-factual relative to their actual author, and the second one is to analyze the newspaper statement as factual or non-factual relative to the authors of the news article themselves. So overall, the survey shows that there are four dominant types of statements used in press discourse, which are concrete, descriptive, hypothetical, and communication factual. The result also shows that press tends to use the majority of concrete, descriptive, and communication factual. It was concluded that the press tends to author in their voice in relatively more event factual than static factual. And to conclusion to the result, it mentioned that the frequency of the count that was generated by this survey shows that newspaper style is exceedingly patterned.
My name is Mohammad Arifin Azlan, and in continuing our presentation in this video, I will explain on my part of the analysis we did in our paper, specifically referring to the methodology part. But before that, as a reinstatement, what exactly are our research objectives? Firstly, we would like to examine the distribution of the factuality verb features, and in continuing, primarily, we would also like to analyze whether they, referring to our source of data, are contextually dependent or independent in terms of factuality. Lastly, we are also interested in exploring the nature of the text and the writer's communicative goals for both articles while comparing the differences and similarities found. Regarding our set of data, in realizing the objectives of our study, two sets of texts in the form of article were chosen, which are travel will return more exotically than ever. That is an article primarily about the returning and nature of the traveling sector post-pandemic and how COVID-19 is interrupting children's education 2020. That is an article explaining the current circumstances of the education sector post-pandemic COVID-19, which were both written and published by the same figure, referring to the Economist. Now, our main theoretical framework in the study were derived from the factuality system. The factuality system functions in depicting linguistic trueness through the usage of signifiers such as verb found in any sentences, specifically in our sets of data, to indicate how factual an event is. Hence, the aforementioned functions of the factuality system are therefore justified towards its implementation in our study, as it is also aligned with our objective in this study. And next, we move on to the classification of factuality verb features. Subsequently, tables for the analysis were created to fit all of the divisions in the factuality system, in which 5 columns were occupied, whereas just 1 column were reserved to verb phrases, which consists of sentences from the 2 articles chosen. In particular, the factuality system can be divided into 2, that are high factuality and low factuality. Moreover, 2 of the initial columns in the table belong to the category of high factuality, which are then further derived into 2 subcategories: the emphatic do, which consists of only the auxiliary do, and high factuality, which consists of inflections such as s, ed, zero inflections, and also auxiliaries as in is, are, was, were, has, have, and finally had as its grammatical features. In low factuality, 2 of the subsequent columns in the table are then reserved for its 2 subcategories, which are highly assuring hypotheticality, in which its grammatical signs are modal auxiliaries will, would, must, should, and also finally low hypotheticality, which consists of modal auxiliaries can, could, may, and might as its grammatical signs. Finally, the last remaining column reserved under the factuality system is the category of ambiguity. In this category, its grammatical cues refer to sentences that are ambiguous, as the name of the category implies, sentences that lack cues or signifiers, and finally that are context dependent. So how was the analysis done? Firstly, in carrying out our study, the first step done or needed to be done involves a meticulous reading of the assigned article of the group members each. Then, sentences that exhibit any grammatical signs within the factuality system are then grouped into its own designated column accordingly. And finally, the findings of the analysis were then discussed thoroughly in this paper. And finally, for my part, I will elaborate on the example of how we did the analysis. So this is an excerpt taken from one of our data, which reads, health will become as central to travel as an airline ticket and passport. And in particular, the analysis was done through the observation of cues or signifiers present. And this is case in this sentence, the modal auxiliary will and also the verb become are considered to be one, and therefore are false and qualifies it to be put under the category of highly assuring hypotheticality.
Next, we will be presenting on the findings and discussion for the study. We have divided into two parts, which are the analysis of result that will be presented by me, Mohammad Riezman, and then the nature of the text and the writer's communicative goal by Brother Afif. So regarding the analysis of Article 1, there were in total of 95 verb phrases documented that convey the factuality system. However, it is surprising to note that there were no sentences that conveys the subcategory of emphatic though. On the contrary, the subcategory of high factuality amassed a staggering 40 verb phrases that makes up 40% of the overall verb phrases. One of the common instances of high factuality recorded was of the auxiliary, found in the sentence such as, there is a vast untapped market, in which the auxiliary is functions as the main verb in the sentence. Regarding the highly assuring hypotheticality, the total sentence classified under it makes up to 17% with 16 verb phrases, distinguished particularly through the modal auxiliary will, followed by a verb after it. For instance, the sentence health will become as central to travel as an airline ticket and passport. Proceeding with the other half of the low factuality, low hypotheticality were found to document 9%, or a total of 9 verb phrases that are mainly involved with the modal auxiliary could, to be followed with a verb subsequently. For example, the sentence, it could be a bigger part of the bargain. Finally, the last part of the factuality system, labeled with 32%, or a total of 30 verb phrases found, is the category of ambiguity. Only two types of phrases are found to belong within this category. There are the infinitive to followed by a verb, or an independent verb with the ing inflection, such as the sentence of to reassert themselves for the former, while the sentence continuing on a path of growth represents the latter. So next, regarding second article analysis, unlike Article 1, Article 2 possesses a slightly higher count on verb lexical and phrases, which are 201 in total. Under the emphatic though, the sentence, he does mathematics on his abacus every morning, suggests the verb does possesses the context of the event, definitive 100% factuality or trueness. Next, the high factuality category scored the highest percentage among all, with the most common auxiliaries belonging to this group is have, such as the sentence, forums have built with discussion on the relative merits of Zoom. Accordingly, these phrases signify a degree of factuality of at least 70 to 90% of truth. On the other hand, any event that falls under low factuality has suggested between below 50 to 90% trueness, scoring only 17% on empirical analysis, which was the high assuring hypotheticality 8% and low hypotheticality 9% in general. One example from high assuring hypotheticality, which consists of modal auxiliary will, is in but will highlight the strengths and weaknesses of teaching online from the sentence. As for low hypotheticality, with the degree of factuality being somewhere less than 50%, some of the notable examples are in the use of auxiliaries can. For instance, not everyone can get online. Article 2 only posits a good amount of ambiguous factuality in its phrasal outcome, such as some teachers had been trained to use such technology. Allegedly proposing that although high factuality prevails, there is no doubt that a degree of vagueness is existential. So lastly, regarding the overall comparison, firstly, with the use of emphatic verb features was relatively low in both articles, but the difference is Article 1 is lower than in Article 2. With high factuality feature, Article 1 is also similarly lower than Article 2. Regarding the highly assuring hypotheticality feature, It is said that Article 1 is higher this time than in Article 2, while the low hypotheticality feature between Article 1 and Article 2 is similar with 9%. Lastly, regarding the ambiguity feature, Article 1 is higher than in Article 2. And then regarding the contextual, there was a greater use of the context-dependent feature in Article 1 with 32% than in Article 2, 37%. However, in contrast, there were more contextual independent verb feature found in Article 2, 73% than in Article 1, 68%.
I am Muhammad Afif Alimeen bin Muhammad Sabri, metric number 1814855, will be continuing the presentation on the nature of text and writers' communicative goals. In this part of the presentation, I will explain the nature of text that will show the author's intention in making the statement to be informative or persuasive to the readers, and move on. The writer's communicative goals, where we analyze the message and aim of the statements of the author towards the readers. These analyses were done on the basis of factuality system in verb function. In Article 1, the author did not use any emphatic factuality system. Therefore, there are no events in the past that was mentioned by the author. Moving on to the high factuality subcategory, it can be seen that the author is trying to inform the readers of factual information so that the readers may be up to date with the current situation. For example, the statement "a trip is still a rarity for most" by the author means that the event is still ongoing during the utterance of the statement. Through the usage of highly assuring hypothetically, the author intends to assure the readers by mentioning the events that were planned for the future or circumstances that have a high possibility of occurrence. For example, the author wrote "should also help make travel easier and smoother," would mean that the statement intends to reassure the readers that there is a high chance that the travel system will be easier and smoother with the use of application that shares one health status, which will also assure their security. Next, the low hypothetically was used by the author in order to inform the readers of events that have low chances of happening. For instance, the author wrote "a huge swath of the world's population could be preparing for a holiday," meaning that there is a chance lower than 50% that a large portion of the world population will be preparing for a holiday. Lastly, there are 32% usage of ambiguity factuality system in the article, which means that the author intends to mention events that will happen at any point of time, such as the availability of international travels in the future. In Article 2, the author used empathic factuality system to confirm the emergence of the events and to inform the readers of the events that already happened so that they may be up to date to the situations. Next, the author also used high factuality subcategory to describe and apprise the readers that the events mentioned were true and had already happened. Moving on, the author used highly assuring hypothetically in order to assure the readers of events that have a high chance of happening, such as the closure of the school that will affect the education of children. Next, the author also used low hypothetically subcategory to imply the events that is likely to happen with low chances, as the author may intend to inform the readers of the chances and let them take their own initiative to prepare. For instance, the author stated for those hoping to start university with the intention to address the people who would enter university without mentioning the time of entry. As a conclusion for my part, the usage of factuality system allows factual information to be delivered to the readers, as well as persuading them either implicitly or explicitly to take their own initiative of preparing by mentioning events that will or will not happen.
Back to me again for the conclusion part. So I will wrap up this whole analysis and discussion, right? Briefly, both articles actually scored highest in the high factuality variety, suggesting that a significant amount of linguistic trueness are existing or existential in both articles. So linguistic manifestation that we can see throughout the analyses that have been presented earlier were highly influenced by the communicative goals. For example, we have persuasive communicative goals from Article 1, and we also have educating or informative communicative goals in Article 2. So basically, this analysis and discussion is considering how factuality affected the outcome context of the factual messages. So based on this, this is how we can see that the connection between communications for instance, communicative goals actually does influence how linguistic representation were actually interpreted, right? So I believe that is it from our group, and thank you very much. Thank you for the time, and stay safe, and Assalamualaikum.